This folding dish rack is perfect for college students, apartment dwellers, campers, anyone who needs to save a little space.
Unlike many projects, making the parts for this dish rack is much easier than the actual assembly. Since it is composed exclusively of long, thin parts, you want to start with clear, straight-grained wood. My local home center has aspen boards for the price of pine, so that was my choice. This rack will also remain unfinished, so you'll want to use a close-grained wood, like pine, cherry, or the aspen I'm using here. Open-grained woods like oak are less suitable because they can absorb too much water too quickly. Working from the cut list, plane the stock to the thicknesses needed. Then rip the parts, leaving them long. Not a lot of setup here, there's only 3 sizes of piece. An indexing jig, similar to a box joint jig, will be used to notch the cross members, but the start points for each side of the jig are different. So the starting notch for each set of parts is cut individually, using my miter gauge and the fence. The indexing jig for this project is built the same way as a standard box joint jig that fits over your miter gauge. The main difference is that the first notch is already cut, and the indexing pin is set to 5/8 of an inch away from the edge of the saw blade. All 5 cross members that make up the 2 halves of the dish rack are notched to accept the 3/8 inch wide slats that we cut earlier. The 3 cross members that make up the main body get 14 notches to hold slats. The other 2 cross members will get 13 notches to hold slats. This allows the slats to nest in between each other when the dish rack is folded. These cross members have all been left long and are being notched from left to right in order to maintain the spacing and avoid having an odd-sized space in the middle if we had worked from both ends. Once all the notches are completed, the cross pieces can be cut to final length. To complete the cross pieces, both ends of each are notched 1 inch wide to accept the legs. Set up a wide dado stack, then set the rip fence to 1 inch away from the outside blade of the dado stack. A couple of passes on each end and your cross members are complete. All the slats can now be cut to length as well. 14 of them to 13 inches long, and 13 to 7.5 inches long. Now the assembly can begin. I found it easier to lay all the slats in the cross members first, square the assembly, and then remove them one at a time to apply glue. This is a dish rack. It will get wet, so be sure to use a waterproof glue rather than just a water-resistant glue. And you want to use the glue sparingly. You do not want it squeezing out around all the joints. Otherwise, you've got to go back in and clean it all up. Much easier to take the care now. As you can see, I'm gluing the slats to the cross members on top and bottom. There is a third one that goes into the main body here, but I added that after everything else had dried. It needs to be precisely located, and I didn't want it moving while I was doing the glue up. Once the body of the dish rack is complete, the legs can be added. All 4 legs get the same counter bore and through hole as indicated on the plans. This is the pivot point where the dish rack will fold. The counter bore that the nut for the hardware sits in will be hard to reach because it'll be inside the dish rack next to the slats. So I inserted the nut in the hole first and then applied a piece of painter's tape to the inside to hold it in place until it was secure. While the 3 cross members for the main body were made exactly the same, the lowest one is going to need to be cut off to allow the legs to fully close. You'll need to remove a ½ inch from each end so that it flushes out with the legs after assembly. The legs are simply glued in place. On the main body, they're glued tight against the inside of the notch, while on the shorter side, they're glued flush with the ends of the cross members. I purposely did not sand all of the slats and cross members before assembly, so that I could maintain a snug fit in the notches and to avoid having little rounds in the bottom corners of each notch. It certainly means some extra work in the hand sanding, but the overall fit and finish is well worth the time taken. The final assembly is simplicity itself. Lay the 2 halves of the dish rack together, aligning the holes in the legs. Then gently insert the bolt, turning it until it catches the threads of the nut on the inside behind the tape. A steel rule inserted behind the tape to support the nut is helpful. The hardware is 832, and I highly recommend stainless steel to keep the parts from rusting and spoiling your project in the future. Snug up the bolts until you have an even gap between the legs on both sides, and then ensure that the dish rack opens and closes properly.
This project is fun, easy to make, and is a perfect gift for the college student, apartment dweller, or newlyweds moving into their first home. Be sure to like, subscribe, and share this video. It really does help keep Woodcademy free.